Set on its bid for Amazon's second headquarters, but did the city and its residents dodge a $5 billion bullet? Let's examine the Amazon effect on real estate, urban resources with Murtaza Haider. He's associate professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. Good to see you again.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So obviously this was a pretty big contest. We made that 20-city short list. There was a lot of people that were pushing for this, but a lot of voices were saying, wait a minute, this might not be the best thing in the world. I think you might have been one of those voices. So let's take a look. Now that we know that we're not getting it in Toronto, have we dodged a pretty expensive bullet?
Well, in terms of 50,000 high-paying jobs, yes, the city could have used it, the local economy could have used it, but at the end of the day, you need to have some absorption capacity. The absorption capacity has to be in infrastructure, in transportation, in housing. If the two biggest challenges in Toronto are transportation and housing affordability, how does 50,000 high-paying jobs entering the market in a short span of time would help the city with housing and transportation? So that was the two major concerns for me, and I was hoping that there should be some growth in economy in Toronto. The other concern at the same time is that more jobs that are part-time are growing in the city than full-time jobs. So if you look at the job growth in the city of Toronto over the last, say, 2-3 years, you see that the part-time growth is much higher than the full-time growth. So obviously the city needs to move up the value chain in terms of the employment it's creating and the kind of employment it will create to sustain its economic foothold. But at the end of the day, you have to have some redundancy in infrastructure, some redundancy in capacity in housing to absorb it, and the lack of it was the major concern for me.
I want to get back to those two pillars, the housing and the transportation infrastructure, but this idea of the well-paying jobs, full-time jobs, we would have liked to have seen that, and the city needs that. I had some people saying, let it grow organically then. Let Toronto create the next Amazon. Don't have Amazon just come in and force itself on the city. The city perhaps has the ability. Do you feel, and the city of Toronto is trying to say now, you know what, we didn't get it, but we made the world aware of us. Is there some benefit for us, the fact that we at least made the 20 list?
Absolutely. I mean, being famous or notorious both works to our advantage. I think there's tremendous benefit or tremendous merit in the argument that we should grow organically. We have been good in innovation space. You look at Ballard in energy space. You look at the research in motion in telecommunication. You look at Nortel. We have been amazingly good in creating businesses with innovative ideas, but we have not been that great in sustaining those. All of our big names have eventually collapsed or are near collapse. And the time is right now for us to not only innovate in Toronto, innovate in Montreal and Vancouver and other large spaces, but at the same time focus on sustaining the growth. Other companies have sustained their growth, not just over 5, 10, or 15, but for decades. And we have to figure out what the secret sauce is that no one has informed us of.
All right, and before we get those innovations rolling, we should probably figure out the transportation, the housing. So let's start there. I was looking at one of your pieces before today in terms of those challenges in housing, and you mentioned the 50,000 jobs with an average salary of $100,000 US. That is far outstrips the average salary for Torontonians. You talked, I believe, about an affordability gap, when maybe a regular guy like me would say, I'm going to make an offer on that house conditional on financing from the bank, maybe an expansion, and some hotshot kid, I think as you put it, shows up and just says, hey, I got the money right here. It's all cash. Take it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what happened in San Francisco. If you and I move there and try to find a place and then say, okay, it's subject to financing, and the seller says, no, don't worry about it. I've got other offers, and people are showing up with cash. So that kind of situation is the kind of situation that happens when you have high-income jobs and a concentration of these high-tech companies that reward their employees rather generously. Now, you compare the average $100,000 salary with the average income or salary, average income in Toronto, which probably is around $45,000, $50,000 or less per person, and then you see the difference. So what happens is that the high-paying individuals outbid others in all sorts of housing markets, not just in the very high end, but also in the middle end. And that's where the crisis emerges, that affordability then the lack of affordability starts at the top and then filters down all the way bottom to rents. And for that not to happen, you need to build a lot more housing, which we haven't done in Toronto.
Now, as far as transportation goes, could this perhaps exercise be a wake-up call to the city and to the province that we are woeful in that regard, and that we might not have gotten this bit of pressure on it, but we still have to figure out a way to move people around this
I think one thing that the city should do is ask Amazon, why were we not selected? right? To see how they see our housing and transportation challenges. Maybe there's something to learn from them. Transportation is a big concern. It is a drag on our growth. If you look at the cost of congestion, half of it may be from the delays that are happening. The other half, or a large segment of it, is the foregone opportunities because congestion is so much that the growth is not taking place. And for that not to happen, we have to invest in relief line. We have to invest where the congestion already exists. We have been misspending our money, our tax dollars, on public transit out in the boonies where people do not take public transit. They moved out not to take transit. They've already figured out how they would commute. But where the congestion really is in the central city, and the relief line and other investments in the city are badly needed. We need to improve the performance of our existing transit system, because at the current rate, we're not carrying even the capacity in our subway systems, and we have to fix that.
Last thing I want to ask you, do you think Toronto ever really had a shot? I think about the two cities that did one now. There's going to be part of the operation near the money center of New York, another part of the operation not far from the political power of Washington. It seems to be key locations to be in.
Oh, yes. If for a company of the size of Amazon that will want to be the retailer, you have to be near money and near political power. And you can't be any nearer to political power than in Virginia or near money, and that's the Long Island city in Queens, New York.
All right, fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Murtaza Haider is professor with the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University.